almost done. Looks like my head is shining with the video, like any effulgence is coming. Hold on, wait 1 minute. Close this curtain.
It's cooler this side of the room, right?
Is it? Probably. I don't know.
Supposed to be like that.
I don't know.
Oh, that's right.
No. So we'll start in a minute. All right, we'll start in just a second. Just wait for me to close this curtain. God. Thank you. Omagyanatminandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshunamalitamena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So we're still continuing discussion of chapter 3 Bhagavad-Gita. You want to grab a book? Okay. I don't think normally Gitas are kept over there. You have to use phone. You can use. So the question begins, the chapter begins with a question from Arjuna concerning the relationship between work in the world and being spiritual. Arjuna sees those two as diametric opposites. So you either one or the other. So how are the two meeting? Krishna has asked Arjuna to be spiritual. Buddho Sharanama Vincha. At the same time, Krishna has asked Arjuna to fight, so that which seems anti-spiritual. So question was asked to clarify what Arjuna is viewing as diametric opposites. So Krishna begins, this chapter is basically making arguments for why one should be spiritual in the world. That is the purpose of the chapter. So the first, what's up, Daniel? Nice to see you again. No problem. So the first argument Arjuna makes is, Krishna makes, is that you should act according to your adhikar. That is the first passage. Adhikar means qualification. So one should perform activity that they're qualified for. Especially in the work of spiritual development, you should practice spiritual principles that are appropriate for where you're at a particular stage of development. If you try to practice some higher level of spiritual principles, but your level is a little bit lower, then you will not be successful. And similarly, if you are qualified for higher level of spiritual application, you just stick to some lower level principles, you'll not move forward. So you should practice according to what you're qualified for. So Krishna says, I spoke of two paths, one karma yoga path, one jnana yoga path. And both paths have the same end in terms of self-realization, but people have different qualifications and thus are qualified for one path or the other. And you should act according to what you're qualified for. And then he basically says those who renounce the world prematurely and take up the path of Jnana Yoga, there's a chance of them being pretenders. Pretender in the sense that they're renounced from the world but meditating on worldly things. And of course, the history of religion is replete with such examples. So Krishna is concerned about that. Therefore, he says it is far better if a person engages in karma yoga, regulating the senses, so engaging with the world in a regulated way, and they're cultivating or growing their inner life, having a genuine, engaging with the world dispassionately with a genuine sense of renunciation. His basic idea is that renunciation is more about what's happening internally than what's happening externally. One may be renounced externally, but meditating on the worldly things, so they are not renounced. Whereas one may be engaged externally what appears to be the worldly activity, but internally they're renounced. And Christians considering that position to be far superior. He will later clarify other arguments why he considers this to be far superior. But the basic point here, as I like to articulate, is that honesty is the best policy. You should just, okay, I have a tendency for worldly behavior. So let me engage in the world in a regulated way and gradually improve my inner life. So he said this is far superior. And my sense of the superiority is just in terms of honesty. I mean, you're just being more honest there, and that's far more superior than a person who's showboating. Prabhupada himself uses that language in one of the commentaries. So his second argument for why one should work in the world and be spiritual is so that you can be prosperous in this world and achieve enlightenment in the next by acts of yajna. So there was this whole discussion of yajna. We're not going to review all the details of that discussion. But in order for there to be material prosperity, there needs to be acts of yajna. And if you want to attain the world hereafter, and for the materialistic person, the world hereafter may mean swarga, heaven, and ultimately you want to attain liberation, and Krishna will mention this later, there also needs to be performance of acts of yajna. So for this reason, you should also work in the world, so that there can be material prosperity, which is very helpful, actually. If you're always concerned about how to survive because of dire straits situation, then very hard to focus on the development of spiritual life, isn't it? Because I hear so many people living in New York, but they're struggling to pay the bills. You have to pay $3,000 from one coffin, known as an apartment building. The apartment building is probably a coffin. I always joke to go to the bathroom, you have to turn sideways in so many of the apartments. You have to go this way and then walk like this. And for that, you have to spend $3,500 per month. What a New York Manhattan tax on top of that. Just because everyone wants to live in the city so much. So they make you pay for that also. You would have said the city slap you out with another tax. So you have to, so yes, if you're struggling to survive, it may be hard to focus on spiritual development. You got to pay $3,500 for an apartment, then you have to eat also. And just between eating and paying bills, and of course for many drinking, that is also expensive. So where is the time for spiritual life? So material prosperity is also very nice. It allows for focus on spiritual life. Of course, material prosperity can lead to other complications. But if you're not struggling that way, you can focus. So he says by acts of yajna, there can be material prosperity. And in the world hereafter, you can also attain. You can go to Swarga, the heavenly planets, or you can attain liberation. So for this reason, you should also work. So now, in this next passage, this is verse 17 through 26, Krishna now giving a third argument for why someone should work. This is the third argument. So this argument, the logic of this argument is that, well, what if a person is actually enlightened? Then for them, there's no need to actually engage in the worldly activity whatsoever. So you can look here at 317, for example. Yastvatma ratir eva syat atmatritastamanava atmaneva cha santushta tashta karyam navidyate. So here 3 words are used to describe an enlightened person. Atmarati, atmatriptash, and then the third line, atmaneva cha santushta. There's all these phrases basically refer to a person who is enlightened. They realize that self is different from matter. And they're enjoying the happiness that comes from such self-realization. Krishna says, Tastra karyam navidyate, for such persons, there is no work for them to do. Because the purpose of all work has been achieved in the experience of the happiness of the self. Right? All work is meant for happiness. Now, people have different concepts of what happiness is, but all work is meant for this purpose only. You want to be happy. Whether you're drinking or you're partying and having sex or working a job to make lots of money or whatever it is anyone is doing, all that work is meant for happiness. That is the final end. So that is actually the purpose of all work. Whether it's Vedic duties and you're acting according to principles of virtue, or you're acting sinfully and just trying to enjoy the senses. In all cases, the same purpose is there. You want to experience happiness. That is actually the purpose of all work. Of course, in Vedic culture, you should regulate that if you really want to be happy. So Krishna, he has this nice verse. We repeated this. This verse is quite important. This is verse 259. Very important verse. Vishyavanivardhante means one restrains from the sense objects. Niraharasya, by practicing principles of fasting. In other words, you regulate your engagement with the sense objects because you know they can be problematic. right? Just like some of us here, we're part of a men's group, and we have regulation on how we use our social media or how we use the computer, how much time you stay on what time you're on the computer. All these things are really important factors. Otherwise, you get into a little bit of trouble. For example, if you're doing anything on your phone or computer after 10 o'clock, ain't nothing good happening. I hear some of my friends talking about I got to do work after 10. I'm like, bro, anything after 10, you ain't doing work. Or you're doing some work, but it ain't the type of work you're supposed to be doing. And so you practice regulation, restraint from the sense objects. According to Nirahara said, literally means to fast from them. But Rasa Varjam, Krishna says, but inside their desire for enjoyment. But you just know this is not good to enjoy this time, this object. But inside you are desiring to enjoy that. So, and because that desire is inside, there are so many rules to regulate the desire for enjoyment. Otherwise, we just destroy each other. That is the result. This is what you call as religious laws and so on. All these laws are there to regulate the desire for enjoyment. Otherwise, if our desire is allowed to act unbridled, we destroy each other. That is the result. Jivo jivasa jivana, and the bigger fish eats the smaller fish. That is just like now, people get upset about this. They don't want God. They don't want the principles of religion, which regulates the desire for enjoyment. They said, let everyone just be free. But the result of that freedom is that the bigger fish will eat the smaller fish. It says there's no rules governing how he should enjoy. And my enjoyment requires eating the smaller fish. Just like there's some fish whose foodstuffs is smaller fishes. Fishies. Fishes? Fishies. That is their foodstuff. So for him to enjoy, he has to eat the smaller fish. And so this principle of nature plays itself out in human society also when there are no principles of religion to govern that desire for enjoyment. The bigger fish will eat the smaller fish. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. And it's unavoidable. Now they're having so many movements, activism and so on, but that is useless thing. All this activism is finally completely useless because the government is irreligious. And they are also irreligious. So they want to correct the situation without introducing any principles of religion to govern that desire for enjoyment. So what ends up happening is that nature plays itself out. Raw nature. The bigger fish eat the smaller fish, and that's just the way it works. They will go on with the movements, and there will be so much hullabaloo, but finally the end result will be the same. That those in the seat of power will eat those with less power. That's just the way it works out. So there has to be principles of religion to govern this desire for enjoyment. Rasavarja. And then Krishna says, Panandrastanavartate, if the soul is experiencing the happiness of its own self, then there is no need for these principles of enjoyment, these principles regulating the desire for enjoyment. Because now he's experiencing the fruit of all work. He's experiencing the happiness of the self. No need for these rules also. Sometimes, you get an image of the hippies, for example, at least in old days. It's all about love and we have that too, the New Agers. Now we call the hippies New Agers. It's the same thing. New Age spiritual. It's all about love and just, what else they say? Freedom. Freedom and love and let it be, or they say some stupid stuff. Just like I remember meeting someone like this and they said, I am. And I was like, you are what? I am. You are what? I am. And then it gave me that look of sort of condescension, like how could you be so ignorant, So like this, okay, you are whatever you are. But you cannot imitate this prematurely. This sense of I am whatever, you're experiencing some higher, that cannot be achieved artificially. Some principle of yoga, you achieve that, then if you actually authentically achieve that, then yes, it's complete freedom. You are not bound by any rules to regulate the desire for enjoyment, which destroys, because you're actually experiencing the desire for the self, which frees you from all such desires. So Krishna is saying that here in 317. So the enlightened person, yes, there is no work for them to do. So Arjuna, because this question was brought up, I think, by Yusuf also earlier. Well, doesn't Arjuna have the qualification of being a self-realized soul? So why does he have to do work? So Krishna's also saying here, yeah, if you're self-realizing, nothing for you to do. Tasya karma nivitate, no work for you to do. Because you've achieved the fruit of all work. You're experiencing the happiness in your own self. And then he says in 18 that you don't gain anything by doing work, nor do you suffer consequences by not doing work. When you're not enlightened, then there is some purpose in doing work, and there are consequences for not doing work, right? Naiva tasya krite narto, nakrite neha kashchana. But for the enlightened person, there's nothing to be gained by working, and there are no consequences for not working because he's already above all of the work by self-realization. Krishna concludes, but therefore, since there's nothing to gain or lose by working, therefore you should work. Which doesn't seem like the most compelling argument, but Krishna will develop this point now. Tasma, therefore, so he's concluding, asakta satatam karyam karma samarchana, you should perform work without attachment, which is what he's promoting this whole chapter, this karma yoga section. Asakto yachanam karma param abnoti purusha, by working in the spirit of detachment, you shall attain the supreme. Param abnoti purusha. So by this karma yoga process, you will attain the supreme. Then in the next verse 20, he gives an example of persons who have done that. Karma neva hisangsena asita janakadaya. Janaka refers to King Janak. He was the father of Sita. You know Sitaram, everyone chants. So Sita's father, his name was Janak. So he gives him as an example of someone who is sangsiddhim, who achieved complete perfection by performing this karma yoga. He certainly, karmana eva, he certainly performed this karma yoga, sangsiddhim, and achieved complete perfection. So he's saying, just follow his example, basically. Now, this is where Krishna develops his argument. And this is a very important phrase that Krishna uses here. Loka sangraham evapi sampasham kartum arhasi. That you should perform this work, loka sangraham, what a desire to help the people in general. So this is the thrust of his, even if you're enlightened argument, even if you're enlightened and therefore are not obliged to work, still you should work for helping the general mass of people, loka sangraha. So in other words, those who are enlightened, they can do the most good for the world. So why should they retreat from the world? Since they're the most enlightened, they can do the most good. And if they're in positions of, let's say, even positions of power, like the kings, we'll hear later on in chapter 4 that Krishna has given this doctrine of karma yoga to the enlightened kings. What is that verse? Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo vidu. It is not that Krishna gave us this knowledge to the sages in the forest. Krishna says, I propagated this knowledge to the Raja Rishis, the kings who are saintly and realized. Because they're enlightened, they can do the most good for society. So this is the thrust of Krishna's, even if you're enlightened argument, that you can do good for the world. So why you should retreat from the world? You can do the most good because of your enlightenment. Loka sangramevapi sampasham kartum arasi. Kind of a nuance of the same point as verse 21. This is a very famous verse. Yat yada charati shreshtas tatarivo torojana. So yat pramanam kurute lokasta anivartate. So whatever the best person is doing, yat yat acharati shreshtas tatarivo torojana, then the common people will follow that. For example, I'm going to say this. This is meant as a joke, though. Don't take it seriously. But like Jai Jagannath's kind of got a little position in Bhakti Center, got a little bit of clout, and so I try to shrishtas, whatever the best guy is doing. You're supposed to laugh. That's supposed to be funny. Yeah, yada charati shrishtas, tatare votorojana. The rest of the people will take as example. Of course, that's a joke, but I do see this happening sometimes because mostly in all the communities I've participated in so far, I'm a little bit more well-read than the average devotee in the community, for the most part. Not always the case, but a lot of the time. And so I come off as very learned. I'm not actually that learned. I just read a little bit more than you, and I have better memory. So then many times I've heard people do this. They'll say, well, Jai Jagannath has said. And that's also gotten me into a little bit of trouble. I'm like, hold on, bro. You didn't hear this from me. Many times when I'm talking to persons, especially about sticky, kind of like philosophical stuff or something. I said, listen, I'm going to tell you this, but you didn't hear this from me. And I don't want my name coming up in a discussion, you know. Well, you know, Jai Jagannath said it. That gives me some ugly eyes sometimes. But that's actually the principle of nature. That's how it works in all societies on a micro level and on a macro level. Whatever, like for example, whatever America is doing, the whole world follows that, for example, right now, because America is the big shot. So yayara chariti shrisha, whatever the best guy is doing, tat tat evotorojana. So the common person, he will see that. Sayat pramanam kurute, and he will take that as pramanam, as evidence for what he should be doing. Lokasta anuvartate, and they will follow that. Right, so if he is said, if he is doing, therefore that must be the evidence for what is to be done. And oftentimes in a Vedanta tradition like ours, we're supposed to be quoting Shastra to justify whatever we're thinking, even whatever we're doing. But oftentimes you'll hear devotees say, Srila Prabhupada said. Srila Prabhupada did, right? Because he's the best man. He's the Acharya. So whatever he said, whatever he did, that is to be accepted as the evidence for what we should be doing, what we should be thinking, what we should be saying, and so on. That's just the law of principle. So this is part of Krishna's argument, that if you're the enlightened person, you're the best person. And if you're working in the world as a leader, especially Arjuna, he's a king, he's leading a whole society, then everyone will follow you. And as the enlightened best person, they will follow you, and in that way they will become benefited. They will go up. Therefore, even if you are enlightened, you should also work in the world. Asakta, without the attachment. And so gotta be careful, because in India they love this stuff, you know, this messaging. Just work in the world, be materialist. No, you work without the attachment, dispassionately, for the loka sangha, for the purpose of benefiting the world, in the proper example. Last stage of Krishna's argument, he gives himself as an example of such an enlightened person. So this is the second place where Krishna has talked about himself. The first place was in chapter 2, verse 61. Do you remember how Krishna speaks about himself there in verse 61? Do any of you recall? We covered it. It's a very important. The first place where Krishna talks about himself in the Gita is 261. And he speaks about himself in what context? Does anyone recall? No, I got to be working on this questionnaire. Where are our questionnaires at? Did you work on it? Did you say you would do it yesterday?
I haven't worked on it.
Did you finish it? What about you? Did you get to chapter 2? Did you even look at the questions? So, yeah, it's okay. No, these guys, they're all right. Do chapter 2. No, I write these questions so you can be benefited. Of course, not in an arrogant sense, but so you can remember and grow. In 261, Krishna speaks about himself for the first time in the context of the success of a person's sadhana. That if they want to be successful, they have to think of him, so that they won't think of the sense objects and thus become degraded. 261 through 63. So this is the second place where Krishna speaks about himself, but he's giving himself as an example of an enlightened yogi who doesn't have to do work. But in doing so, he also talks about his position as God, which is interesting. Throughout the first 6 chapters of the Gita, Krishna is not really speaking about himself as God yet. That will happen in the middle 6 chapters. But he does bring himself up periodically as examples. And in doing so, he also reveals something about his Godhead in doing that. So the next few verses, I'll just read through them. Just because the context is giving himself as an example. He says here, O son of Pritha, there is no work prescribed for me within all the 3 planetary systems. Why not? Because I'm God. So God doesn't have to do anything because he has, and if you read the commentaries, we don't have time for detailed discussion on this part. He has potencies that do everything for him. For example, one potency of Krishna is called the Satya Sankalpa Shakti. So this means that Sankalpa means whatever you determine, Satya immediately becomes true. How nice that would be. You just had a Shakti that whatever you think, it immediately comes true. Of course, Krishna doesn't give us such Shaktis because the world would be in a disarray. If we had that Shakti, we would ruin our own life, actually. Just like I'm remembering this movie, maybe some of you have seen, but what is that movie with Jim Carrey, where he gets to be God for a week? Oh my God, what was it? Oh, Bruce Almighty, yes. I don't remember so much in the movie, but he gets to be God for 1 week and he falls in love at one. This is so silly. And once he falls in love with some character in the movie, and he wants to make like a romantic situation, and he feels that the moon is too far, so he wants to make it like a very nice moonlight. So he uses his God powers and like just brings the moon closer to the earth, and now it causes all these natural catastrophes on the earth. It's so stupid. There was like a whole disaster situation in the world because of that. He was trying to set it right. So like this, if Krishna will give us a Satya Sankalpa Shakti, there will be disaster. But Krishna has such Shaktis that automatically accomplish everything without any endeavor on his own. So he says, I have no work to do because I'm God in the whole three worlds. Nanavaptam avatavyam varta evacha karmani. He says, nor do I want anything, which is usually the inspiration for work. Why do you work? Because you want something, isn't it? Either money or whatever it is. What do you want from work? Money. What do you want from work? Yeah, money. Money's a pretty solid one. I want inner satisfaction. No one is saying like that. I want money. So nana avaptam, I have no want in me. Avaptavyam, na avaptavyam, nor do I have anything to gain from working. So this is because I'm God. So that helps in this department. He says, still, even this is the situation, I'm engaged in work. And then in verse 23, he continues the same line of reasoning. For if I ever fail to engage in carefully performing prescribed duties, certainly all men will follow my path. Because his argument here is because I'm Bhagavan, God, so people are certainly looking to me. And if I don't perform work, especially when I appear as the avatar in this world, and this will come up later, then Mama Vart Manu Vartante Manusha Parta, sorry, all people will follow my path. And not doing work, they would be ruined. So this is his next verse, his next point. If I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds will be put into ruination. Why? I will be the cause of creating unwanted population. What is the unwanted population? People who don't do work, because they're seeing my example. And that way they will become useless population and cause destruction to the world. And I will thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. So in this way, Krishna is giving himself as an example of an enlightened person. He has to be enlightened because he's God. He's ever enlightened. There's no question of not being enlightened. And he performs work. Lokasambha, to protect the world or for the benefit of the world. That is his point that he's making here. So then he concludes his argument here with verse 25 and 26 as a conclusion of the line of reasoning. Very important verses, nice verses. So sakta karmani avidwangso yata kurvanti bharata. So just like the person who is ignorant, he performs work with full attachment, right? Just like us, we are ignorant. Probably, I don't want to make any unfair assumptions, but there's a good chance that many of us are suffering from the ignorance. So when we do work, we do it with full attachment. Sakta karma. Sakta means we're attached. Just like same example I'm giving because it's just such a nice one for me. You open the door for someone and you attach that thank you, right? Even if they say thank you, you won't even care so much. But if they don't say thank you, then it's just like, excuse you. Sometimes, or you may imagine yourself, you imagine yourself grabbing them and throwing them back and then closing the door. Because when you are attached to the result of some work, mind goes crazy. So just as the ignorant person does work with full attachment, and he works hard because of that attachment, isn't it? Krishna will later on say about work in passion, that it causes sangha and it causes trishna. So sangha means attachment and trishna means thirst. Thirsty, the fellow gets thirsty. And from that, he works very hard. That's the mode of passion Krishna will describe later on. So just as that person is working like this, Kuryave dvam satak sakta chikirshur loka sangraham. In the same way, you should work without the attachment. Why? Shikirshur loka sangraham, desiring to do benefit for the world. So this is the thrust of that argument. So just as the attached person works really hard for benefiting himself, in the same way, you should work very hard without the attachment for benefiting the world. If you are enlightened, and this is the context. And then 26, he says, don't try to disturb the mind of the ignorant people. Nabudhi bedam janaya agyanam karma sanginam. Those persons who are agyanam, they're ignorant persons. Karma sanginam, and therefore they're fully attached to what they're doing. Nabudhi bedam janaya. Do not try to make their buddhi opposite what they're doing. Buddhi bedam means to make the buddhi opposite of what they're doing. In other words, we try to break their faith by criticizing what they're doing. What is this nonsense? Like that, you know, how devotees do, right? Criticize the material. Of course, there is a little context for this because here the people are actually performing proper Vedic stuff. So if they perform proper Vedic rites, they can make gradual progress. So Krishna says better not to disturb or make their intelligence separate from that because they're making gradual progress. As this is a side point, but Prabhupada says in the purport, this is why devotee is more merciful than the Lord. And the Lord is saying don't disturb. He said, well, the devotee will disturb. Let me see if I can find that. I have to look it up. Prabhupada said this was devotee is more merciful. Anyway, Joshaya Sara Karmani Vedam Yukta Samachara. Rather, you should engage in work. The learned person, that is, should engage in work for the setting an example for the gradual development of spiritual life. Joshua Sarvak, he engages in all work, the learned person. Yes, Prabhupada says for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness, for gradually, again, setting an example of how to gradually become enlightened. So that's the end of the passage. The main thrust of it is why the enlightened person would work in the world. And Krishna's main point is to benefit the world. Not only in the practical ways and the performances of yajna, but by setting a proper example. And then he gives himself as an example of such a person. And then he concludes the topic by saying, work hard like the attached person, but with detachment for the benefit of the world. So as a final point, this is why, especially in our movement, Prabhupada, at least initially, started the movements in cities with a desire to benefit the world. And he particularly started his movement in New York because he felt that whatever was happening in New York, everyone was following that. And therefore, it was a strategy that let Krishna consciousness spread here and then others will follow. So that's the discussion. I covered all the points very nicely, the ones I wanted to cover. I got the questionnaire here. If you don't already have it with you, you guys can split up into teams and take 10 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes. It shouldn't be difficult to answer these questions if you were paying attention. And then we'll conclude the discussion with any final questions, or if there are no questions, reflections. Hey, online group, I have to start. I'll post the questions for today's section. There's just 3 of them. And I'll send the questionnaire to anyone who reaches out to me. Boom. Okay. See, if you actually answer the questions in class, then it won't be so much to catch up on. That's chapter 2. I may have ran out. I had that was the last of my chapter 3s. Because I gave it to you guys last time, bro. All right. So we're taking 5 to 10 minute pause and come back. Okay. You see, Danielle, y'all can.
Enjoying everyone's Yeah.
So you're thinking that
Just printed out fully.
Oh, right, yeah, okay, so let's see,
the person doesn't have
we
any
started, here. Oh, wait.
Which one's over here?
For the passage that we discussed,
I'm,
passage verses 17 to 26.
yeah. No, we're up here, yeah, so isn't that because they're already enlightened? Is that the answer? Yeah, if they've achieved self-realization, there is no achievement. So they're no longer obliged, I guess. He has no purpose, self-realized man has no purpose in the discharge of his responsible duties, nor does he have any reason to perform such work.
Basically, those principles were meant to regulate sense enjoyment.
Oh, that's the answer, yeah.
But if you're already transcending
Yeah.
that propensity to just enjoy the senses here, so just doing
Yeah.
your whole life for service.
Yeah.
There's no
That
need
is,
to
that's right. But then he changes his mind. For what two reasons? What is the like doesn't work for that's to do to make
My head is up shiny.
That history does prescribe to you.
Yeah, I think that's
History work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can ask for it, yeah.
Because everything would go to
She
history.
says that exactly. He's saying I'm self-fulfilled, so I don't need to do anything. I'm in control of everything.
Yeah,
I'm transcendental to all the three worlds, so why do I need to work?
yeah.
But still, I work to show me.
And because everything's dark.
Well, we're not in Krishna's position.
No, we're not.
Unfortunately,
For example,
So what more do you learn?
he's always self-satisfied, but that he does work even though it's not allowed for himself.
Now that I think that's what we're
Okay, we're good? Looks like everyone's got it. Okay, ring, 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 ring. Let's check in then. So, any final questions, or if not questions, if you have clarity, you can share a reflection or something. Not something random, something relevant to the discussion.
So what is the reason?
Well, it's really one reason is to benefit the world. And the nuance is that you benefit the world by setting example. Right? Sayat pramanam kurucha, that will be taken as evidence for what should be done. So our life, especially even when you're a nobody, like here in the temple, many of us are just nobodies. Like if we cease to exist tomorrow, no one will really miss us that much. That's just the reality. Still, even though that is the case, we set examples for each other. Even though we think no one's really looking at us, but the fact of the matter is people are looking. Especially when you identify yourself as spiritual or something like that, then people look at your example. It sets a certain example. And so if you live a bad life or live a bad example, then you're doing ill to the world. And you may think, oh, I'm just a nobody. I'm not very significant. What difference does it make? No, it makes a big difference. So here in the city, because everyone lives poorly, they reinforce that bad example amongst each other. And that way the culture just gradually just degrades and becomes more and more degraded. Whereas if there was a culture where you had to really step up and live a good example, even though we're nobody in that sense, we're not such an important person like a Krishna or something. But if everyone is living a certain standard of life and you see that wherever you go, that forces you to bring up to a higher level. And that way, living a good life, being a good example, even though you're not the most important person, it has a huge impact on the environment that you exist in. And so the nuance point is be a good example, that you do good to the world by being a good example, even if you think you are an insignificant person. And the opposite can also be said. You do bad to the world by living a poor life. Even though you think no one's looking, I'm insignificant, what difference does it make? You actually bring harm to the world by living a poor example of a life. So in this way, Krishna is saying, do good to the world by being a good example. Work responsibly, dispassionately, and of course, finally for us, be a devotee. So it is not that the responsibility is just on a Donald Trump, the king of the country, but rather it's on every individual within the country. I always find it interesting how in modern day they chastise the president and make all this propaganda against him. I always joke, I'm like, how many of you would be any better if you were in that position? I imagine myself, if I'm in that position, would I be able to do it better? And of course we think, of course I'll be better. That's because we don't know what it's like to have that much power, that much influence. We don't know the sort of political stuff that's going on where you might have to actually kill someone just to keep things. All sorts of stuff are going on like that. Even we hear in the Shastra how Ramchandra, other kings also, Prithu, they used to do the espionage. They would go into the kingdom incognito to see what was happening, what was going on, and spy. And Prabhupada said this is part of kingly duty to spy. So you don't know what type of stuff you got to do in order to keep things together. Or sometimes even take an easier example. When you think that I'm pretty good, I can be spiritual even if I'm not in the association of devotees. And then as soon as you get outside the association of devotees, you're like, man, I'm not spiritual. Sometimes it's like that. So anyway, we set everything we do is important, even however insignificant you are. The king is a reflection of the people. So if you want to do good to the world, even if you're insignificant, you should be a good example. As his argument, do good to the world by being a good example. That's powerful, even if you're insignificant. I notice it here in Bhakti Center also. As soon as 1-2 of us stop coming in the morning, then the whole thing just starts gradually. And then as soon as a few of us really like on it, then all of us are just like on it. It's something, it's very interesting to observe that. And one person you see not coming, another person, you're like, all right, this is the culture, So do good to the world or to your Bhakti center or to your environment, to your family. by being a good example. As Krishna's point here. Okay, anything else?
There's still duty in that though, right? Like a self-realized person who then needs to be an example. Could it be said? Is that their duty?
You could say it like that.
But
They don't have duties in the ordinary sense. As we were mentioning in today's discussion, duty in the ordinary sense was meant to regulate our desire for enjoyment. Otherwise, our desire for enjoyment destroys. So that is why duty is existing in an ordinary sense. So in a, let's say, a spiritual sense or a more transcendent sense, it is their duty to do good for others. Kind of categorically different, like this. That is okay. Okay, anything else? Any other comments or questions? Yes, Danielle.
So I guess it's 325
325, okay.
about not disturbing the minds of ignorant people.
Yes.
So is that just in relation to their attachment to the results of work, or because I've heard that verse come up before when I was first starting yoga teacher training, and I basically wanted to share it with everyone, and then I would get really frustrated when people weren't like getting it or getting into it even, and then I would like I remember a teacher of mine talking about this, about like, you know, they have to walk their own path and you're not necessarily there to disrupt their mind. So that's when I first came across this verse. Is it, do you understand my question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Hold on. I was trying to see if this is the purport where he says. Yeah. So we try to give to others and they're not getting it or not appreciating it. And the tendency is just call them nonsense on the face also. Like, how could you not understand? And your teacher's suggestion is that people are walking their own path, and therefore we should not try to disturb them. And there's some truth to that, and this verse of the Gita can also be referenced as indicating some truth to that. But here, frankly speaking, people don't have a path. They have one path, the path of sensual enjoyment. That is not a path. That is a default setting for all conditioned beings. And therefore, they're in need of some enlightenment. They're not it's not like people are on a path of, okay, maybe your friends do a little bit of yoga, but even then they're not really on a path. They're doing it as like, because my other friends are doing it, or I want to take some nice Instagram pictures, or they're not like on the path of yoga. They don't accept teachers or gurus to guide them on the path. They don't usually practice all the principles of a particular path. Like you're going to, for example, practice Ashtanga yoga. There's so many principles there. I remember when I went for my yoga intensive in Goa in 2014, I was genuinely surprised to see how most of the yogis there ate meat, like that was, and drank alcohol. Like we would practice 3-4 hours of yoga in the morning, like intense Ashtanga yoga vinyas. In the lunchtime, evening time, they were by like this nasty, like big old like shrimp thing. Like you could see the arms and everything. I was like, oh! And drinking alcohol. So they're now on the path. Disturbing them is important.
Yeah.
And disturbance means what? You may question, hey guys, is it ahimsa like a really important principle in yoga? Why are we eating meat? They'll get disturbed to hear that. But it could be worth having a discussion. Of course, finally, at the end of the day, you have to see what is the extent of your influence on individuals. And sometimes if we see that we don't have that ability to inspire, to uplift, to influence, then we may come to the conclusion that they're not very good association. And since I'm not able to transform that association, I may detach myself a little bit from that because I'm not able to do good in that area at the present moment, nor am I able to benefit from that association also to come up. So for that reason, I have to.
Just
detached. Yeah.
I heard it. Someone say if they're Krishna, if their Maya is stronger than your Krishna, then you have to keep distance.
Yeah, if their Maya is stronger than your Krishna, which is always going to be the case for the most part, because all of us have been in Maya for a really long time. And when we're starting Krishna consciousness or spiritual life, we're kind of like tottering, but we're leaning towards Maya. And a little bit of that Maya association just pulls us over. So we're not able to influence and uplift, nor are we able to benefit from that. We may have to detach. Otherwise, in certain cases, why not throw a little disturbance in there? Hey, are you guys yogis and eating meat? Like, that has nothing to do with the yoga path. And so on. Here, when Krishna says don't disturb, these are people who are following Vedic formulas, which are meant to gradually uplift the soul. So if you criticize them and they stop that, but they also don't take your thing, so then they'll become degraded. So Krishna's saying don't disturb that, because they're actually on a path and making progress. But modern humanity, they're pathless. They're just being led by their unbridled senses here and there. So they need help. All of us do. We need a lot of assistance. And sometimes a little disturbance is good.
That feels much better to me than my previous misunderstanding of the
Okay.
verse.
Yeah.
Especially when the rest of it's about being a good example. So
Yes.
See, right.
Sometimes that could be potent too, just being a good example and not saying anything directly. And people seeing that. Again, it's power in seeing. This is one reason why you live in an ashram. You know, why do we live in an ashram? Because someone's eyes are always falling on you. And that's, of course, intense. There's a little bit of pressure, but it's also healthy. You see, so if you take it seriously or responsibly, then you feel the need to be an example because people are looking and you're looking at them also. So sometimes there's no need to say anything, just by people seeing, they start questioning things themselves. They start feeling it like, wow, especially if they see for a long period of time. Like suppose you're improving your spiritual life, and every time they see you, you're like smiling and singing, and every time you see them, they're looking more and more mopey. The dark circles are getting bigger. They're smelling like alcohol. Then they say something is wrong with what I'm doing, and she's doing something that's right, because how is she singing like this? So that could also be powerful. Different strategies. Now, of course, it fits different personalities also. Like with my personality type, I like to agitate. Even if I don't even accept sometimes the things that I'm saying, I'll say it anyway just to agitate. Force some thinking, force some conversation. It fits my personality type. But some people, they're quiet type, they will just set an example. That also is very powerful. So different approaches. Okay. Hari Om Tat Sat. Thanks a lot. Srila Prabhupada Jai. Later online.